Picture this. You're on a desolate highway in West Texas. Past midnight, your eyelids growing heavy. You spot an old gas station, faintly lit, battered by time, but seemingly harmless. You stop, thinking it's just another rest stop. But the moment you step inside, you feel it. Something isn't right. By the time you realize what's going on, you're trapped, and the strangers lurking in the shadows have other plans for you. This is my story, and it's one I'll never forget. My name is Ben Carter. I've been driving trucks for nearly 2 decades, and let me tell you, being on the road at night alone isn't for the faint of heart. I've seen my fair share of strange things, mysterious lights in the sky, wild animals darting across highways, even the occasional weirdo who thinks standing in the middle of the road is a good idea. But nothing prepared me for what I experienced one October night in 2018 on Highway 20, deep in West Texas. I was hauling industrial supplies from Dallas to El Paso. It was a routine run, one I'd done dozens of times before, and I was making good time. The night was clear, the stars brighter than I'd seen in months, and the road ahead stretched endlessly into the dark. It was the kind of drive that makes you feel small, like the world is so vast and empty, and you're just a blip on the radar. By midnight, the hum of the engine and the monotony of the highway started to wear on me. My coffee thermos was empty, and no amount of adjusting the radio seemed to help. The fatigue was creeping in, making my eyelids heavy and my thoughts slow. I slapped my face a few times to keep myself alert, but it was clear I needed to pull over and take a break. That's when I saw it. In the distance, a faint glow broke through the pitch-black horizon. At first, I thought it might be another trucker parked on the side of the road, but as I got closer, I realized it was a gas station. Its neon sign flickered weakly, casting a pale, sickly light over the barren landscape. The words Lone Star Fuel were barely legible, half the letters burnt out, the other half coated in grime. The gas station looked ancient, like it had been there since before cars were invented. The walls were faded and cracked, the windows foggy with age, and the parking lot was riddled with potholes and weeds. One of the gas pumps leaned at an awkward angle, as if it might topple over at any moment. Despite its decrepit state, it felt like a blessing. There wasn't another stop for miles, and I didn't have the energy to keep driving. Just a quick stop, I muttered to myself, pulling my truck into the lot. The tires crunched loudly on the gravel, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. I killed the engine and stepped out of the cab, the cool desert air hitting me like a slap. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world has stopped. Shaking off the unease, I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the entrance. As I approached the gas station, the air seemed heavier. The faint hum of the neon sign buzzed in my ears, a sound that felt oddly oppressive in the stillness of the night. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently with the breeze, and the chipped paint on its surface made it look like it hadn't been touched in years. For a brief moment, I considered just heading back to my truck and pushing through the fatigue. But my legs were stiff, and I could feel my body begging for a break. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped closer. The windows were so caked with grime that I couldn't see inside, but I could make out faint shadows moving, probably from the flickering fluorescent lights. Reaching out, I pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly, the sound cutting through the silence like a scream. The interior of the gas station was even more run down than the outside. The linoleum floor was cracked and curling at the edges, and the shelves were mostly empty, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. A few cans of soup and some ancient-looking snack bags were scattered here and there, but most of the inventory was long gone. The air was stale, carrying a faint odor of mildew mixed with something metallic that I couldn't quite place. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. No answer. I stepped further inside, scanning the room with my flashlight. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered overhead, casting strange shadows on the walls. The cash register sat on the counter, its keys yellowed with age, and a small bell rested beside it, untouched and rusted. It felt like the kind of place where time had simply stopped. Despite the emptiness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that presses down on you, making every little sound seem magnified. My boots squeaked against the floor, and the sound made me flinch. I made my way toward the back, where a small cooler hummed faintly. Its glass door was cloudy with condensation, and when I opened it, I found nothing but a lone bottle of water sitting on the bottom shelf. The label was faded, and the bottle felt unnaturally warm too. The touch as if it had been sitting there for far too long. I shook my head, muttering figures, and shut the cooler door. Turning back toward the entrance, I glanced around one more time, my flashlight catching the edges of dusty posters and faded advertisements on the walls. The place felt abandoned, but something about it seemed wrong. That's when I noticed it, a faint glow coming from a door at the back of the station. The door was slightly ajar, and the light spilling out was soft, almost unnatural. My unease deepened as I stared at it, frozen for a moment before my curiosity got the better of me. The faint glow from the back room drew me in, though every instinct in my body told me to stay away. The door was slightly ajar, revealing just enough to pique my curiosity without giving anything away. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should investigate or head back to my truck and leave this place behind. But something about the light, it didn't feel right. It was too soft, too warm, completely out of place in the cold, lifeless gas station. Maybe someone's back there, I thought, trying to justify my decision to move closer. If there was a clerk hiding in the back or even someone who needed help, I didn't want to just walk away. Gripping my flashlight tighter, I took slow, deliberate steps toward the door. The air seemed to grow colder with every step. My boots made soft creaks against the floor, the sound amplified by the stillness of the station. I reached the door and paused, listening intently for any signs of movement. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above, accompanied by the occasional flicker. I nudged the door. Open with the toe of my boot, keeping my flashlight raised and ready. The hinges groaned loudly, and for a second, I stopped breathing, half expecting someone, or something, to jump out. But nothing happened. The room behind the door was small, cluttered with old boxes and rusted metal shelving. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting the strange, warm glow I'd seen from outside. The bulb swayed slightly, as if it had been disturbed recently. I swept my flashlight across the room, taking in every detail. At first glance, there was nothing particularly strange about the space. Just forgotten storage for a gas station that had clearly been neglected for years. But then I noticed something odd. A child's sneaker sitting by itself in the corner, its bright red color completely out of place in the otherwise dull and dusty room. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the shoe. It looked small, like it belonged to a kid no older than 6 or 7. Nearby, there was a frayed piece of rope coiled neatly on the floor, along with what looked like an old, rusty pocket knife. I crouched down to get a better look, my heart pounding harder with each passing second. Just as I was about to reach for the shoe, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffling sound. It was faint, coming from somewhere behind me, and it froze me in place. I spun around, flashlight sweeping the shadows, but there was nothing there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. Silence. I backed out of the room quickly, my nerves on edge. Whatever had made that sound, I wasn't sticking around to find out. The unease that had been gnawing at me since I arrived was now screaming at me to leave. I stepped back into the main area of the gas station, my heart still racing from what I'd just seen in the storage room. The images stuck in my mind: the child's shoe, the frayed rope, and that rusty knife. It didn't make sense. Who would leave something like that in a place like this? And more importantly, why did I hear that shuffling? The uneasy silence inside the gas station was now deafening. Every flicker of the fluorescent lights, every creak of the old building sent my nerves on edge. I glanced toward the door, my truck visible just outside the window. Part of me wanted to drop everything, get back in the cab, and drive as far from this place as I could. But another part, driven by curiosity or maybe sheer stubbornness, made me stay. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. I took a deep breath and walked toward the counter. Maybe there was a clue there, an old logbook, a note, anything that might explain what was going on. The cash register was coated in dust, and when I tapped one of the keys, it stuck in place. Beside it, I noticed an old clipboard with a faded sheet of paper clipped to it. The paper was a handwritten inventory list, dated over a decade ago. The items listed were mundane: cigarettes, canned goods, cleaning supplies. But scrawled across the top in red ink were the words, "Do not enter storage." My stomach tightened. That must have been the room I'd just come from. I felt my breath hitch as I reread the words. Whoever had written that note wasn't leaving a casual reminder. It felt more like a warning. As I stood there, staring at the clipboard, I heard a faint sound from outside. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it quickly grew louder. Footsteps. My flashlight trembled slightly as I pointed it toward the window. I saw movement. A shadow darted past the window, just outside my truck. My chest tightened. Someone was out there. I ducked behind the counter instinctively, trying to keep my breathing quiet. Peeking out over the edge, I scanned the lot for any signs of movement. At first I didn't see anything, but then my eyes caught it. A figure standing by the side of my truck. The person was barely visible in the dim light, but I could tell they were tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over their face. They didn't move, didn't even flinch, as if they were waiting for something, or someone. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the figure. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone anymore. I stayed crouched behind the counter, gripping my flashlight tightly, my mind racing. Who was that figure by my truck? Were they alone, or were there others? The questions swirled in my head as I strained to hear any sounds from outside. The figure remained eerily still, like they were waiting for something. My truck was my lifeline, my escape from whatever nightmare I had wandered into. If they were tampering with it, I'd have no way out. I took a deep breath and slowly peeked over the counter again. The figure was gone. My chest tightened as my eyes darted around the lot, searching for any movement. The flickering neon sign cast shifting shadows, making it hard to tell what was real and what was my imagination. Just as I started to think they'd left, I heard the sound of gravel crunching near the side of the building. They weren't gone, they were circling the gas station. My instinct screamed at me to get back to my truck and drive away. But something about the way they moved, their stillness, the deliberate pacing, made me hesitate. It felt like a trap, like they were waiting for me to make the first move. I glanced toward the back of the gas station, where the storage room door still hung slightly open. The faint glow from inside seemed to beckon me, as if it held some answer to this terrifying situation. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate further. Moving as quietly as I could, I made my way toward the storage room, my flashlight casting long, shaky beams of light across the walls. The air back there was colder than before, and the metallic smell I'd noticed earlier was stronger now, almost overpowering. I stepped inside, my eyes immediately drawn to the objects I'd seen earlier: the child's shoe, the frayed rope, and the rusty knife. But as I scanned the room, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: a half-eaten sandwich sitting on a crate near the corner. The bread was still soft, the meat slightly damp, as if it had been left there only minutes ago. My stomach churned. Someone had been here recently. Maybe they still were. I froze, listening intently. That's when I heard it again, a faint shuffling sound, this time coming from the far corner of the room. My flashlight beam landed on a stack of boxes, their edges jagged and worn. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound firm. No response. The shuffling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I inched closer to the stack of boxes, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. My heart pounded in my chest as I leaned in, ready to confront whoever, or whatever, was hiding there. And then, out of nowhere, the sound of footsteps echoed again, this time louder and closer. But they weren't coming from the corner, they were coming from behind me. The sound of footsteps behind me sent a jolt of fear through my entire body. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, its beam darting across the small storage room. The door leading to the main gas station was still ajar, and through the narrow crack I thought I saw a shadow move. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. It was part reflex, part desperation, as if speaking loudly might scare whoever, or whatever, was out there away. But nothing answered. The silence that followed was suffocating. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my ears, and my breathing was shallow and quick. I stepped cautiously toward the door, every instinct in my body screaming at me to leave this place. But my legs felt like lead. I edged the door open just enough to peer through. The gas station's main area looked just as empty and lifeless as it had when I first entered, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I stepped back into the room, my flashlight beam catching on something I hadn't noticed before: a set of muddy boot prints leading from the far corner of the room to the doorway where I now stood. The prints were fresh, the mud still damp, and they weren't mine. My breathing hitched as I realized that someone had been standing in this room just moments before. The half-eaten sandwich, the shuffling noises, it all made sense now. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the main area, like something heavy had fallen or been knocked over. I flinched, my flashlight jerking upward to illuminate the ceiling, before I forced myself to focus. The noise was followed by a low, guttural scraping sound, as if metal were being dragged across the floor. I pressed myself against the wall, gripping the flashlight so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My eyes darted to the small stack of boxes in the corner. If someone or something came through that doorway, I needed a place to hide. As I debated my next move, another sound broke the stillness, a faint whisper, low and unintelligible, coming from the direction of the main area. The whisper turned into a murmur, then into a disjointed string of words that I couldn't make out. It was almost as if whoever was speaking wasn't talking to me, but to someone, or something else. I took a step toward the door, this time moving with more purpose. I needed to get back to my truck, no matter what was out there. I leaned my head just far enough out the door to glance at the gas station's interior. My flashlight caught movement near one of the shelves, just a blur of motion, gone as quickly as it appeared. That's when I saw them. A figure was standing near the front door, their back to me. The dim light from the neon sign outside cast their silhouette in an eerie glow. They weren't moving, just standing there, as if waiting for something. The figure near the front door didn't move, their silhouette unnervingly still against the flickering glow of the neon sign outside. My breath caught in my throat as I crouched slightly, trying to make myself smaller. My flashlight stayed off. I didn't want to give away my position. I studied the figure from the shadows. They were tall and lanky, with a hood pulled low over their face, obscuring any distinguishing features. Their posture was strange, unnaturally rigid, as though they were frozen mid-step. The longer I stared, the more I noticed the unnatural tilt of their head, slightly cocked as if they were listening to something I couldn't hear. I had two choices: retreat to the storage room and risk being cornered, or make a run for my truck. My gut told me neither option was safe, but I had to act. My truck was my sanctuary, my only shot at escaping this increasingly surreal and terrifying situation. As I inched closer to the doorway leading back into the main area, the figure shifted. It wasn't much, just a slight turn of the head, but it was enough to send a wave of adrenaline surging through me. They knew I was here. I didn't know how, but I could feel it. That's when I noticed something even more unsettling: the faint outline of another figure standing just outside the gas station's window, barely visible through the grimy glass. They were shorter, stockier, and hunched over slightly, their hands pressed against the window as though they were peering inside. The two figures didn't interact, didn't even seem to acknowledge each other. It was almost as if they were working in tandem, their silence and stillness far more unnerving than if they had been shouting or moving around. Then, without warning, the figure by the door turned completely toward me. Though the hood still obscured their face, I could feel their gaze boring into me from across the room. My breath hitched, and I instinctively stepped back, the heel of my boot striking the edge of a loose tile. The tile shifted with a loud clack that echoed through the station like a gunshot. The figure moved, slowly at first, one step at a time, their feet scraping against the dusty floor. I felt my blood run cold as they began to pick up speed, their body lurching forward with a jerky, unnatural motion that made my stomach churn. My survival instincts kicked in, overriding every other thought. I turned and sprinted back into the storage room, slamming the door shut behind me. The flimsy wood rattled on its hinges, and I quickly shoved a rusted metal shelf in front of it. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, scanning the room for another way out. The shuffling noises outside grew louder, joined by the sound of the second figure's footsteps. They were inside now, moving toward the storage room. I was trapped. The flimsy storage room door rattled violently as something, or someone, pushed against it. The rusted metal shelf I'd shoved in front of it screeched across the floor, barely holding. My flashlight beam wavered as my trembling hands struggled to keep steady. The shadows outside the door danced in the flickering light, and I could hear muffled voices, low and guttural, coming from the other side. "Who's in there?" a voice finally called out, sharp and gruff. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. I didn't respond. My instincts told me whoever was out there wasn't interested in a friendly conversation. Instead, I backed into the far corner of the room, scanning for any other exit. The small window near the ceiling was my only option, but it was too high to reach without something to stand on. The voice outside came again, this time closer. "We know you're in there. Come out now and we won't hurt you." The promise of safety sounded as hollow as the echo of their voice against the concrete walls. My heart pounded in my chest as I crouched low, hoping the shelf would hold long enough for me to come up with a plan. The shuffling stopped for a moment, and the sudden silence was deafening. Then I heard a different voice, softer but more sinister, hissing something I couldn't quite make out. It was clear now, there were at least two of them. The door creaked ominously as the pressure against it increased. "You've got nowhere to go," the first voice growled, followed by a harsh laugh that sent a chill down my spine. I grabbed a rusty metal pipe that had been leaning against the wall, holding it tightly in both hands. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what they wanted. My truck? My cargo? Or something worse? Suddenly, the shuffling stopped again. The silence was unnerving, But it didn't last. A loud crash echoed through the gas station, followed by the sound of glass shattering. They weren't going to wait for me to come out. They were breaking in another way. I took a chance and peered through the tiny crack in the door. The figure I'd seen earlier was now inside, standing near the counter with their back to me. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, like they were struggling to keep their balance. As they turned slightly, I caught a glimpse of something shiny in their hand, a knife. The other figure was still outside, near my truck. I could see their shadow moving back and forth through the grimy window. My blood ran cold as I realized they were blocking my escape route, making sure I couldn't get back to the safety of my rig. I knew I couldn't stay hidden for long. If I didn't make a move soon, I'd be trapped in this storage room with nowhere to run. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the gas station, jolting me into action. I gripped the rusted metal pipe tighter, my palms slick with sweat. The figure by the counter shifted slightly, their head jerking toward the noise. They were communicating with the person outside. I could tell by the way they paused and tilted their head as though listening for instructions. My mind raced. I couldn't stay in this room. I'd be a sitting duck if they decided to storm in. The only way out was through the broken window near the ceiling, but I needed something to stand on. My flashlight beam landed on a stack of old crates in the corner. The storage room door creaked again, the pressure on it growing louder. The shelf I had wedged against the door shifted slightly, and I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. I worked quickly, dragging the crates toward the window as quietly as I could. Every scrape against the floor felt like a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. I climbed onto the unsteady stack, balancing precariously as I tried to push the window open. The frame was old and rusted, and it barely budged when I shoved it with my free hand. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, sweat dripping down my face. Behind me I heard the unmistakable sound of the door splintering. My heart sank as I realized they were about to break through. "Get out here now!" one of them shouted, their voice raw and angry. This time, there was no pretense of negotiation, just raw hostility. I gave the window one last hard shove, and it finally creaked open, the cold night air rushing in. The relief was short-lived. The stack of crates wobbled beneath me, and I had to steady myself to avoid toppling over. Just as I hoisted myself halfway through the narrow opening, I heard the storage room door slam open behind me. "Stop right there!" the gruff voice barked. I didn't look back. My instincts screamed at me to move faster, to get out of this place before it was too late. I wriggled through the window, scraping my arms against the jagged edges of the frame. The metal pipe slipped from my hand and clattered to the ground below as I tumbled out into the dirt. The moment I hit the ground, I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the sting of gravel biting into my palms. My truck was only a few yards away, but it felt like a mile. The figure I'd seen earlier was now standing by the driver's side door, their hood pulled low over their face. In the dim glow of the gas station's neon sign, I caught a glint of something metallic in their hand, a crowbar. I had no time to think. Adrenaline surged through me as I bolted toward the truck, every muscle in my body screaming with fear. I sprinted toward my truck, each step feeling heavier as if the ground itself was trying to hold me back. The figure by the driver's side door shifted, turning toward me. For a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of their face, a pale, gaunt expression framed by the shadow of their hood. Their eyes glinted unnaturally in the dim light, sending a shiver down my spine. "Get away from my truck!" I yelled, hoping to sound braver than I felt. My voice carried across the empty lot, but it didn't seem to faze them. Instead, they raised the crowbar, slamming it against the truck's side mirror with a loud crack. The glass shattered, fragments scattering onto the ground like ice. I didn't stop. My focus was on the passenger side of the truck. the one side they weren't blocking. I needed to get inside, lock the doors, and figure out a way to get the hell out of there. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. The second figure, the shorter, stockier one, was now creeping around the front of the gas station. They were closing in, moving quickly but without making a sound, like a predator stalking its prey. My chest tightened as I realized I was being flanked. They weren't just trying to intimidate me, they were cornering me, cutting off my escape routes. I reached the passenger side door and yanked it open, throwing myself inside. My hands fumbled for the lock, and I slammed it down just as the figure with the crowbar reached the window. They smashed the crowbar against the glass, but the reinforced material held, cracking under the pressure but refusing to give. "Damn it," I muttered, reaching for the keys still in the ignition. My fingers trembled as I turned them, the engine roaring to life. For a brief moment the sound drowned out everything else. The pounding of my heart, the shouts from outside, the sickening scrape of the crowbar against the glass. I threw the truck into reverse, the tires kicking up gravel as I backed out of the lot. The figure with the crowbar stumbled back, momentarily caught off guard. But the relief was short-lived. As I turned the wheel to straighten out, I saw the shorter figure step into the path of my headlights, holding something in their hand. It was a knife. A long, serrated blade that glinted ominously in the light. They stood their ground, their expression unreadable, as if daring me to keep going. My foot hovered over the brake, instinct telling me not to run them down. But then they moved. In a flash, they lunged toward the front of the truck, slashing at the tires. I felt the truck lurch as the blade connected, the hiss of escaping air loud and unforgiving. "Damn it!" I shouted, slamming the gear shift into drive. My only chance now was to push through, flat tire or not. The truck groaned as I pressed hard on the accelerator, the flat tire dragging against the pavement. The entire vehicle shook, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of that gas station before they closed in completely. The shorter figure jumped out of the way, narrowly avoiding being clipped by the bumper, but they didn't seem scared. Instead, they stood there, glaring at me with that same unsettling blank expression. As I pulled forward, the taller figure appeared again, sprinting toward the truck with the crowbar raised. I swerved, narrowly avoiding them, and heard the metallic clang of the crowbar scraping the side of the trailer. My knuckles were white as I gripped the wheel, sweat pouring down my face despite the cold night air. My heart was racing, but I couldn't let panic take over. My truck might not be built for speed, but it was a hell of a lot tougher than anything they had. Even with the flat tire, I was determined to make it out of there. The headlights illuminated the desolate highway ahead, and for a split second, I thought I was in the clear. But just as I picked up speed, the glint of taillights appeared in my side mirror. A beat-up old pickup truck roared to life in the gas station lot, its engine coughing and sputtering before it tore onto the road behind me. "Of course they've got a truck," I muttered through clenched teeth. My pulse quickened as I saw the pickup gaining on me, its headlights bouncing erratically as it sped over the uneven pavement. The figures in the gas station weren't just opportunistic thieves. They were organized, coordinated. They had a plan, and I was part of it now, whether I liked it or not. The pickup truck swerved wildly, edging closer to my rear bumper. I could hear its engine roaring, the guttural sound mingling with the hiss of my deflated tire. My truck was heavier, slower, and already struggling to maintain speed. If they managed to pull alongside me, I didn't want to think about what would happen next. I needed to buy some time. Gritting my teeth, I pressed the brakes suddenly, causing my truck to lurch forward. The pickup swerved, its tires screeching as the driver struggled to avoid rear-ending me. The maneuver worked, momentarily. They backed off, but only for a moment before accelerating again, this time pulling up alongside my trailer. The passenger window of the pickup rolled down, and I saw the shorter figure leaning out, brandishing the knife. Their expression was cold, focused, as they slashed at my truck's side mirror, shattering it completely. I couldn't hear their shouting over the roar of the engines, but their intentions were crystal clear. They weren't giving up. I glanced at the dashboard, my mind racing. My CB radio was out of range, and my phone had no service. I was completely alone, outmatched, and running out of options. The battered pickup truck roared alongside me, its engine sputtering like it was held together with duct tape and desperation. The shorter figure, still clinging to the passenger window, jabbed at my truck's trailer with their knife, the screeching metal-on-metal sound echoing in my ears. I gritted my teeth and tightened my grip on the wheel. I couldn't let them force me off the road. Not here, not now. The highway stretched on, endless and empty, offering no salvation. My deflated front tire made steering a struggle, and every bump in the road sent violent shudders through the cab. Still, I pressed on, the needle on my speedometer edging dangerously close to red. If I could just outpace them, maybe they'd give up. But something told me these weren't the kind of people to quit. The pickup's driver swerved sharply, ramming into the side of my truck. The impact jolted me sideways, and I nearly lost control. My trailer groaned under the force, the metal frame shuddering as the tires fought for grip on the asphalt. I glanced into my remaining side mirror and saw the taller figure in the driver's seat. Their face obscured but their intent clear. They were hurting me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were steering me towards something. I scanned the dark horizon ahead, my stomach sinking as I noticed a narrow dirt road branching off to the right. The pickup angled itself, trying to nudge me toward it. "Not a chance," I muttered under my breath. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest as the truck surged forward. The pickup fell back momentarily, its sputtering engine struggling to keep up. I used the opportunity to veer left, forcing them to adjust their position. But they didn't stay back for long. The pickup sped up again, and the shorter figure leaned further out of the window, this time gripping what looked like a chain. My heart sank as they swung it toward my windshield, the heavy metal links smashing against the glass with a deafening crack. The impact left a spiderweb of fractures, and I knew one more hit like that would completely shatter it. "Think, Ben. Think," I muttered, my mind racing. I needed to gain the upper hand. But how? My truck was too bulky to maneuver easily, and the flat tire was slowing me down. I glanced at the dashboard, my eyes landing on the switch for the trailer's brake override. An idea formed, risky and borderline reckless, but it was all I had. My fingers hovered over the switch as I waited for the pickup to pull alongside me again. When they did, I slammed the brake override, locking up the trailer's wheels. The sudden force caused the trailer to fishtail violently, the rear end swinging out toward the pickup. The driver tried to swerve away, but they weren't fast enough. The trailer clipped the front of their truck, sending them skidding across the road. For a brief moment, I thought I'd won. But as I watched the pickup spin out of control, I saw its headlights angled toward the dirt road. They weren't done yet. The pickup spun wildly across the road, its tires screeching against the asphalt as the trailer's swing knocked it off balance. My heart pounded as I gripped the steering wheel, watching the chaos unfold in my side mirror. The truck fishtailed but didn't flip, coming to a grinding halt a few yards behind me. For a fleeting moment, I thought I was in the clear. But then the headlights realigned, and the engine sputtered back to life. They weren't done. "Damn it," I muttered under my breath. My truck groaned in protest as I pushed it harder, the deflated tire dragging against the pavement and sending vibrations through the entire cab. I didn't have much speed left in me, but I wasn't stopping. Not here, not for them. The dirt road they'd been trying to steer me toward loomed ahead, its uneven surface lit faintly by my dim headlights. I didn't want to take it. It was narrow and clearly not meant for a rig my size, but staying on the highway with them chasing me was a death sentence. I swerved onto the dirt path, the trailer lurching violently as it hit the uneven ground. The cab rattled with every bump and dip, but I kept going, praying the road wouldn't dead end. Behind me, the pickup followed, its headlights bouncing erratically as it barreled onto the dirt road. Dust kicked up in thick clouds, obscuring my mirrors and making it nearly impossible to see what was behind me. The sound of their engine, though, was unmistakable, relentless and growing louder. The road narrowed further, forcing me to slow down. The overgrown brush scraped against the sides of the truck, and the jagged rocks threatened to shred what was left of my tires. Up ahead I spotted a sharp bend in the road, barely wide enough for my trailer to navigate. I eased off the accelerator, carefully steering into the turn. The trailer groaned as it swung wide, its wheels teetering dangerously close to the edge of a shallow ravine. My hands gripped the wheels so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but I managed to pull the rig through. The pickup wasn't as careful. Its driver gunned the engine, trying to close the gap between us. I caught a glimpse of them in my mirror as they rounded the bend too fast there, tires skidding on the loose gravel. For a moment, I thought they might lose control entirely, but they managed to recover, their determination as unshakable as ever. A wave of frustration and fear washed over me. They weren't chasing me for money or my cargo anymore. This was personal now, a game of cat and mouse, and I was the prey. The road ahead disappeared into darkness, twisting and turning unpredictably. I had no idea where it led, but I had no choice but to keep going. The dirt road stretched ahead like a dark, unforgiving tunnel, and every bump, every jolt felt like a reminder that my truck wasn't built for this terrain. The flat tire made the steering sluggish, and the trailer swayed dangerously every time the road curved. Still, I pushed on, my pulse hammering in my ears. Behind me, the pickup truck remained relentless. Its headlights bobbed and swerved erratically through the cloud of dust my rig kicked up. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could hear their engine roaring, closing the gap bit by bit. They were faster, more agile on this terrain, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up. Up ahead, the dirt road split into two paths. There was no time to think or even slow down. I veered left, praying I wasn't heading toward a dead end. The new path was narrower, with thick brush encroaching on both sides. The sound of branches scraping against the trailer was deafening, and I winced with every screeching impact. I stole a glance in the side mirror, squinting through the dust. The pickup had taken the same turn, its driver maneuvering recklessly, swerving to avoid obstacles but gaining ground all the same. My grip on the wheel tightened as I considered my options. I couldn't outrun them on this road, not with a damaged truck and a trailer weighing me down. I needed to do something, anything, to slow them down. Ahead, I spotted a narrow passage where the road pinched between two jagged outcroppings of rock. It was barely wide enough for my rig, and I knew the trailer would scrape against the sides as I squeezed through. But it also presented an opportunity. As I approached the choke point, I slammed on the brakes, causing the trailer to jackknife slightly. The squeal of metal on rock echoed through the night as the trailer sideswiped the outcroppings, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. Behind me, the pickup's driver didn't have time to react. They plowed into the dust cloud left by my sudden maneuver, and I heard the unmistakable sound of their tires skidding on loose gravel. The pickup clipped one of the rocks, its right headlight shattering on impact. It careened sideways, the driver fighting for control as the truck's rear end swung wildly. For a moment, I thought I'd bought myself some time. But the engine roared again, and they straightened out, their truck battered but still functional. "They're not giving up," I muttered, my frustration mounting. Whoever these people were, they weren't just after my cargo. This was something more, something I didn't want to understand. The road straightened out again, but the terrain was getting worse. Deep ruts and jagged rocks threatened to destroy what was left of my tires, and I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. I needed a plan, and fast. The dirt road was punishing, and I felt every jolt through the cab as my truck struggled against the unforgiving terrain. My hands were clammy against the wheel, my breathing ragged, but I couldn't let up. The pickup truck behind me was relentless, its single working headlight cutting through the dust cloud I was kicking up. The road ahead dipped suddenly, and I barely had time to react. The truck lurched violently as it hit the incline, the trailer bouncing precariously behind me. I fought to keep control, my arms straining against the wheel as I guided the rig down the slope. The pickup followed, its engine growling like an animal stalking its prey. At the bottom of the hill, the path leveled out, but the narrowness of the road didn't leave me much room to maneuver. Thick trees lined both sides, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands trying to grab my truck. The trailer scraped against them, snapping branches and sending debris flying into the night. I glanced at my side mirror, but it was useless. The dust and darkness obscured everything behind me. The sound of their engine, however, told me they were still close, too close. Suddenly, an idea hit me. It was risky, but it might be my only chance to slow them down. The trailer was heavy and unstable on this uneven road. If I could use it to block the path, I might be able to buy myself enough time to escape. I waited for the next curve in the road, keeping one eye on the pickup's erratic headlights. When the turn came, I hit the brakes hard and jerked the wheel, forcing the trailer to swing wide. The move sent my truck skidding sideways, and the trailer fishtailed violently, nearly tipping over as it swung across the road. The pickup didn't have time to react. The driver slammed on their brakes, but the loose dirt betrayed them. Their truck swerved, tires screeching, and I heard the loud crunch of metal as they collided with the side of my trailer. The impact shook the entire rig, and for a second, I thought the trailer might flip. But it held, and I regained control just in time to straighten out and keep going. I pressed the accelerator, the truck groaning in protest as it clawed its way forward. Behind me, the pickup was stalled, its engine sputtering as the driver tried to recover. I allowed myself a brief moment of relief, but I knew better than to celebrate. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to give up that easily. The road ahead forked, and I chose the path to the right, hoping it would lead me back to a main highway. The sound of the pickup's engine faded, but my nerves stayed on edge. Every shadow, every bump in the road felt like a new threat waiting to pounce. But as the path narrowed even further, I realized I wasn't out of the woods yet. Quite literally. The road ahead grew narrower, flanked by thick underbrush and towering trees that blocked out even the faintest moonlight. The only light came from my headlights, their beams trembling as the truck jostled over uneven terrain. My nerves were frayed, every bump and scrape setting my heart racing. The brief silence behind me felt eerie, like the calm before a storm. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Time felt meaningless, but the glowing numbers told me it had been barely 10 minutes since this nightmare began. 10 minutes of chasing, swerving, and barely escaping. It felt like hours. Just as I let myself believe I'd lost them, a flicker of light appeared in my side mirror. My chest tightened. The pickup truck's headlight pierced through the cloud of dust in the distance. They were back. Of course, I muttered through clenched teeth. Whoever they were, they weren't stopping until they got what they wanted. Or worse. I slammed on the accelerator, but my truck was already struggling. The flat tire groaned in protest, the vibrations rattling my bones as I pushed the rig as hard as it could go. Could hear the pickup's engine now, the growl of its motor growing louder as it closed the gap between us. Up ahead, the dirt road opened into a small clearing. Relief surged through me as I realized I could finally maneuver without risking my trailer hitting something. But that relief was short-lived. In the center of the clearing sat a small, dilapidated shack, its roof caved in and walls leaning precariously. The road split into two paths around it, but both were equally narrow and treacherous. The pickup's engine roared louder. They were gaining on me, and I had no time to think. I veered left, my trailer barely clearing the edge of the shack as I rounded the corner. Behind me, the pickup followed, its headlights bouncing wildly as it barreled through the clearing. They weren't even trying to avoid the shack. The pickup grazed one of its corners, sending shards of wood splintering into the air. The sound of the crash was deafening, but it didn't slow them down. If anything, it seemed to make them more aggressive. I gritted my teeth and focused on the road ahead. The path was rocky and uneven, but it sloped upward. Chance to gain some distance if I could push my truck hard enough. My tires struggled for grip as I climbed, the engine groaning under the strain. As I crested the hill, my headlights illuminated something that made my stomach drop. The road ahead didn't lead to freedom, it dead-ended at a steep drop-off. My mind raced. I couldn't stop, not with them right behind me. I had to think fast or this would be the end of the line, literally. The realization that the road ended at a drop-off hit me like a punch to the gut. My headlights illuminated jagged rocks below, the slope far too steep for my rig to navigate safely. My mind raced, desperate for a way out. Stopping wasn't an option, not with that pickup closing in behind me. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt just feet from the edge. Gravel skidded under the tires, some spilling over the precipice. The cab rocked as the trailer's momentum pushed forward, threatening to tip the entire rig over. I gripped the wheel tightly, holding my breath until the truck finally settled. Behind me, the pickup's headlights appeared over the crest of the hill, bouncing erratically as they barreled toward me. The driver didn't slow down, their engine roaring as they closed the gap. I had seconds to act. I shifted the truck into reverse and slammed the accelerator. The rig lurched backward, the trailer swinging slightly to the side. My plan was risky, borderline reckless, but it was all I had. I could use the trailer's bulk to block the road and force them to stop. The pickup didn't waver. Its single working headlight glared like an unblinking eye as it raced toward me, and I could see the silhouette of the shorter figure leaning out the window again, something metallic in their hand. They were coming for me, and they weren't planning to leave empty-handed. As the trailer swung wide, I cranked the wheel hard to the left, causing the rear end to slide further across the road. The pickup's driver finally realized what I was doing and hit the brakes, their tires skidding on the loose dirt. The sound of squealing rubber filled the air as the truck fishtailed, its rear end clipping the side of my trailer. The impact rocked my rig, but I held steady, forcing the trailer to jackknife completely. The pickup spun out, its rear bumper slamming into a boulder on the side of the road. For a moment, everything went still. Then the pickup's engine sputtered and died. Its headlights flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the scene into near darkness. My own headlights cast long shadows across the wreck, and I could see the driver and passenger inside, their movements frantic as they struggled to restart the vehicle. This was my chance. I shifted the truck into drive and gunned it, veering away from the edge and back toward the clearing. My flat tire groaned in protest, but I didn't care. The pickup was stuck, at least for now, and I wasn't going to waste this opportunity. As I sped down the rocky path, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I stole one last glance in the mirror. The pickup remained where it was, its engine silent. But I knew this wasn't over. They hadn't given up yet, and neither had I. The dirt road leveled out as I sped back toward the clearing, the truck groaning with each jolt and bump. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline keeping me focused despite the chaos I'd just escaped. The wrecked pickup truck was behind me now, but I knew better than to assume it was over. These people weren't ordinary thieves, they were relentless, and I had no doubt they'd find a way to come after me again. The clearing came into view, its eerie stillness almost mocking after the nightmare I'd been through. The broken-down shack loomed in the center, its sagging roof casting jagged shadows across the ground. My headlights swept over the area as I slowed down just enough to maneuver my rig through. My focus was on finding a way back to the main road, a path that would take me far away from this desolate, hellish stretch of dirt. I flicked on my GPS, praying for a signal. The screen blinked, frozen for a moment, before finally springing to life. Relief washed over me as I saw a route that would take me back to Highway 20. It wasn't far, just another few miles down a winding path. I shifted gears and pressed forward, determined to put as much distance as possible between me and the wrecked pickup. But then, in the distance I saw it, faint lights flickering through the trees. My stomach dropped. It wasn't the same pickup. These lights were brighter, steadier. My first thought was that it might be another vehicle, maybe even someone who could help. But as I approached, my relief turned to dread. It wasn't a car. It was fire. Flames licked at the base of a massive tree near the side of the road, their glow casting long, dancing shadows across the dirt. The acrid smell of burning wood filled the air, mixing with the metallic tang of my own sweat. My headlights illuminated the scene further, revealing that the fire wasn't accidental. Someone had set it deliberately, a barricade to block the road. I hit the brakes hard, the truck skidding slightly as it came to a stop a few yards from the flames. My pulse quickened as I scanned the area, my eyes darting to the tree line on either side of the road. The fire crackled loudly, its roar drowning out any subtle sounds that might have warned me of what was coming. And then I saw them. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their faces illuminated by the orange glow of the flames. One of them was holding a long piece of metal, possibly a tire iron, while the other carried what looked like a shotgun. They stood there, unmoving, blocking the only path forward. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I realized the truth. This wasn't just about scaring me or stealing my cargo. They wanted me trapped. I wasn't sure what terrified me more, the fire or the look in their eyes. The two figures stood silhouetted against the roaring flames, their shadows stretching toward my truck like grasping hands. The one with the shotgun shifted slightly, the firelight glinting off the barrel. My instincts screamed at me to reverse, to turn around and escape. But I knew the road behind me wasn't safe either. The wrecked pickup might still hold the rest of their group, and I wasn't about to risk running straight into them. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind raced, weighing my options. The fire blocked the road ahead, but it wasn't an impassable inferno. If I timed it right and hit the flames fast enough, my rig might make it through. The thought of plowing toward armed strangers wasn't ideal, but I didn't have much choice. The figure with the tire iron took a step closer, their body language oozing menace. They raised the weapon above their head and shouted something, but their voice was drowned out by the crackle of the flames. I didn't need to hear their words to know what they wanted. They were daring me to come closer, taunting me like I was prey. "Not today," I muttered through clenched teeth. I threw the truck into reverse, the engine roaring as I backed up just enough to gain some momentum. My heart hammered as I kept my eyes locked on the figures, their movements tense and deliberate. They weren't backing down, but neither was I. The moment I shifted back into drive, they seemed to realize what I was planning. The one with the shotgun raised the weapon, aiming it directly at my windshield. I ducked instinctively as the first shot rang out, the deafening boom reverberating through the cab. Glass shattered, spraying shards across the dashboard and cutting into my arms. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the acrid smell of gunpowder. But I didn't stop. I slammed on the accelerator, the truck lurching forward with a guttural roar. The engine strained as I pushed it to its limit, the flames growing larger in my windshield with every passing second. The figure with the tire iron darted to the side, disappearing into the darkness. The one with the shotgun fired again, the shot going wide and missing my tires by inches. The truck hit the flames with a thunderous crash. Heat engulfed the cab, the fire licking at the edges of the windshield as I plowed through the barricade. For a moment, it felt like the world itself was burning, the roar of the flames mingling with the screech of metal and the deafening hum of the engine. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. The flames disappeared behind me, and I burst out onto the other side, the scorched road stretching ahead like a lifeline. My truck groaned in protest, the tires struggling to regain traction, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The roar of the flames faded into the distance as my truck pushed forward, battered but still moving. Every nerve in my body was on edge, my heart pounding as I struggled to keep my focus on the road ahead. The shattered windshield whistled with the rush of cold night air, and the acrid smell of burnt rubber filled the cab. I knew I wasn't safe yet. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those two figures chasing me, but all I saw was the orange glow of the fire shrinking into the distance. The narrow dirt road widened slightly, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I allowed myself a shallow breath of relief. My hands trembled against the wheel, and the adrenaline that had kept me going began to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its place. But the silence didn't last long. In the distance, the faint rumble of an engine reached my ears. My stomach clenched as I realized they weren't done. They had another vehicle, or they'd managed to get the pickup running again. Either way, they were coming, and I was still deep in the middle of nowhere. My eyes darted to the GPS mounted on the dashboard. The highway wasn't far now, maybe another mile or two. If I could just make it there, I'd have a better chance. The flat tire thumped rhythmically against the ground, and the truck shuddered with every uneven patch of dirt. I knew I was pushing it to its limits, but I didn't have a choice. The headlights of their vehicle appeared in the mirror, bouncing erratically as they sped over the uneven terrain. The sound of their engine grew louder, more aggressive, and I could see their outline now. A black SUV, newer and faster than the beat-up pickup they'd used before. My breath quickened as they closed the gap, their lights glaring like twin predators' eyes. I slammed the accelerator, coaxing every ounce of power out of the truck. The SUV pulled closer, its driver swerving back and forth as if trying to intimidate me. I gritted my teeth, keeping my focus on the road. The trees lining the path began to thin, and I could see the faint glow of the highway lights ahead. Freedom was so close, but I wasn't there yet. The SUV veered to the side, attempting to overtake me. I swerved hard, blocking their path and forcing them to fall back. My trailer swung dangerously, the weight threatening to tip the entire rig, but I managed to steady it just in time. The SUV pulled back, its driver clearly frustrated, but they didn't give up. Up ahead, the dirt road merged with the highway. Relief surged through me, but it was tempered by the realization that they might try something drastic to stop me before I reached it. I gripped the wheel tighter, bracing myself for whatever came next.